Hi, I'm Ted Nelson. I think I'll tell you today about the orgy clubs of the 1970s because I haven't seen this popularized anywhere else. Backstory. I always had a very liberal attitude about sex. I had a very sexual childhood, won't talk about that. And I had the run of Wanamaker's bookstore when I was a kid. My folks allowed me to buy one book a week. And I read a lot more, so I, for example, read Burgo Partridge's History of Orgies, and I said, oh, that sounds great. Now, this was in the 1940s when they said that, oh, you mustn't have sex before marriage. And of course, promiscuity is terrible, let alone having more than one partner at a time. But the Kinsey report came out about the same time, and I read that too. And of course, that's not how things went at all. That wasn't the real reality, and I knew it was all hypocrisy. So I looked forward to what I read between the lines as adult sexuality in the United States, which was extensive, as I later found out. Later confirmed. College, there was a lot of good sex, at least my second and fourth years. And I was too busy the first and third. And in the 60s, the pill came out. Now, this liberated women in a new way, because whereas men could walk away from a sexual incident, a woman who was pregnant could not so easily do so. For the well-to-do and the connected, there was the abortion called D&C, dilation and curettage, which wasn't called an abortion. But the pill freed up women, and at that time we thought there were only two venereal diseases, syphilis and gonorrhea, and they were both cured by penicillin. Little did we know, little did we suspect what was coming. So, around the corner of the 1970s, quote, wife-swapping began. And this meant that naturally, people's instincts and liberality would allow them to go off in pairs of couples, for example, or to switch. And this became popular. And then the orgy clubs opened. Now, Plato's Retreat opened, I believe, in 1978 in New York City. Now, I was a fervent reader of Screw magazine at the time, and I read the opening statement, and I was there the first week with my lovely girlfriend at that time. It was a wonderful relationship, very deep. We would sleepwalk when we were apart, and we would see strange animals when we drove at night, but it didn't work for other reasons. But anyway, so we went to Plato's Retreat the week it opened. Now, if you read Wikipedia, Plato's Retreat was someplace else. That was later. The first Plato's Retreat was in a loft building on the east side of Fifth Avenue, as I recall. That copy of Screw magazine, unfortunately, got mouse-eaten, so I was not been able to confirm it before I gave them away. But I believe it was about a loft floor on a Fifth Avenue loft building about 11th Street on the east side. Well, there was an open bar. That is, a bartender had a little cart, and you could have all the liquor you wanted for nothing. And we signed in as Scott and Zelda. Of course, Scott and Zelda Fitzgerald were the party-going couple of the 1920s. And when Playboy reviewed Plato's Retreat 3 years later, I think it was Buck Henry who wrote the review, and they signed in as Scott and Zelda, whereupon the gal at the desk said perkily, oh, Scott and Zelda, you've been here before. So how many Scotts and Zeldas cavorted at Plato's Retreat, we'll never know. Anyway, so that was a delightful experience. And 2 years later, on a California trip, I met a wonderful gal whom I will refer to as Joyce. And we went to Steve and Sally's party house in Oakland. Well, that was just a trip. And because it had now evolved so that you could have little private curtain spaces, or you could be on the bunk beds in the open, or whatever. And it was a delightful experience. And I met a couple of people there. One was a nurse that I swung with, as we say. And when a droplet appeared, I said, that's fluid of Cowper's gland. And she said, come on. I said, you're a nurse. You should know these things. Anyway, A year later, I was in San Antonio, miserable, and Joyce came to live with me. And we had a marvelous, frenetic 6 months or so, where we went not only to Steve and Sally's party house, but to Le Trapeze in New York, which is just closed. The others closed much sooner. Le Trapeze in New York is just closed, where we swung with Jerzy Kaczynski and his girlfriend, gorgeous model. Amusingly, Larry Moyer later told me that he and his girlfriend had swung with Jerzy Kaczynski and his girlfriend, so maybe it wasn't that big a soap culture. But those were the party houses. Now, the biggest one was in L.A. called Sandstone. I visited there once just to get the lay of, as it were, the lay of the land, and the pricing was like $1,200 a year for membership. Now, a wonderful book called Thy Neighbor's Wife by Gay Talese of the New Yorker, of the New York Times, is a first-hand account of Sandstone and his other experiences in the wife-swapping community of the early 70s. So this is I didn't talk about my first orgy. This was in about 1970, and it was, I've also advertised in Screw Magazine, and someplace like Ossining, New York, and they'd rented a pool which was downstairs in some other club. So the people in the pool were secretly having an orgy, and I had brought a Glaswegian policeman's cape, a rain cape, and everyone borrowed it to go upstairs to get drinks at the bar. So what is this, a convention of caped people? But anyway, I signed in as Zeke Smith, and everybody made fun of me for trying to disguise my identity. So those were the days, you see, before there was AIDS, before we knew about herpes, and heaven knows how many other conditions. AIDS, incidentally, was they didn't publicize it in the 1980s when it became a big deal, but AIDS was really mainly transmitted by anal intercourse, but no one wanted to distinguish at the time between various forms of bisexual relations and so on, so it wasn't very clear. And everybody and the whole scene froze up about that time. So those are some recollections of the orgy subculture of the late 70s and the orgy clubs. I just thought somebody should have a first-hand record. Thank you.